Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Aula. It's my pleasure to introduce today's topic of this session. I'm Quentin Wies, part of the International Students Committee, the organizing team behind this year's St. Gallen Symposium. And today we tackle a topic that's both critical and close to my heart: Europe's economic future. As a European myself, I feel a deep sense of urgency when I think about where we stand in a global race. We are a continent with a rich history of innovation. Remember, the Industrial Revolution began here. Yet today, I can't help but feel that we are falling behind. We are losing against our competitors in both the East and the West. What happened? We used to lead in areas of technology, engineering, and industrial progress. But now, as rising costs, hesitant investments, and geopolitical pressures weigh heavily on us. And unfortunately, Europe seems to be stuck in a cycle of regulatory complexity, fragmented markets, and an atmosphere of uncertainty that's slowing down our potential. The question we need to ask ourselves is not just about surviving in the global economy, but about thriving in it. How do we regain our competitive edge? How do we future-proof our companies and unlock new waves of innovation? And perhaps most importantly, can we as Europeans find ways to collaborate across borders and across sectors to revive our place in the global economy? To me, the path forward involves simplifying and streamlining a regulatory environment, easing the way of doing cross-border business on this continent and supporting the next wave of advancements like AI and green tech. We need to make it easier for businesses to innovate and scale. And above all, we need to invest in our people, our talent, our entrepreneurs, and our next generation leaders. But here's the catch. We can't do this alone. We must work together, not just across countries, but across industries. Collaboration is key to future-proofing Europe. The more we unite our strengths, the more we can rise above the current uncertainty and create a prosperous, competitive, and independent future. This is an exciting time for Europe, but it requires bold leadership and a willingness to adapt. It requires us to look beyond the present and imagine what a future of Europe is, where Europe is leading again. That's what I believe that we need to do. That's what we all need to work towards. So let's make today's conversation one of action, one of vision, and one for hope of Europe's future. And to help us guide us through this crucial discussion, I'm honored to introduce our moderator, Professor Scott D. Anthony, Clinical Professor of Business Administration at Dartmouth College. Please welcome Scott D. Anthony together with his panel.
Well, good morning. We are going to work really hard to make this a conversation. So let me just tell you how this is going to work, and then we will get into it. I'll spend a few minutes offering some framing comments. I'll then get your voice immediately into the discussion. I'll introduce my panelists. I will give them a question that I have not prepared them for, so get ready for it. Then I will give each of them a question that I've kind of prepared them for, and then we'll get you into the discussion. And again, I really want to make this a conversation as much as we can. So first, just a couple framing comments. So in 1998, I was living in the UK. I co-authored an article with some colleagues at McKinsey. Sorry, Nick, I left soon after that.
Forgiven.
But I co-authored an article that said the fundamental economic challenge that Europe faces is lags in productivity compared to the United States, 1998. Last year, the Draghi report pointed out that was not a new phenomenon. In fact, over the next 26 years, it got worse, not better. Europe today has about 80% the productivity of the United States. The Draghi report, of course, said to fix this, we need to invest at a level we have never seen before, above what the Marshall Plan was proportionately. More than 800 billion euros of investment is required to address this. I then flashed back to 2022. I was ending 12 years in Singapore, moving back to the US, and I went to the Consumer Goods Forum, which is an annual event that gets all the top leaders in the consumer goods industry. This time it was in Dublin. Alan Jope at the time was the CEO of Unilever. He was on stage talking about the crises of the day. At the moment, it was supply chain pressures as the pandemic began to wane. It was Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Those were the things on people's mind. Alan got on stage and he said, I'm tired of living in unprecedented times. Can't we just live in precedented times for a while? Everybody laughed like you did. A year later, he was no longer CEO of Unilever. His handpicked successor lasted less than 2 years. This is the world in which we operate. In the 1940s, Kurt Lewin, one of the early thinkers about organizational change, a psychologist by training, offered a model. He said, in essence, at any given moment, an organization is frozen. And when it is frozen, it cannot change. Something happens that causes it to unfreeze. Change is then possible, but you have to move quickly because the organization refreezes and change becomes impossible. You can argue that what we are going through right now is the great unfreezing, where facts have turned into assumptions, have turned into open questions, where anything is possible, as scary as that can be. But the window is finite. There's only so much time before things refreeze. We now think about this specifically as it relates to Europe. Could we open up the slide with the QR code, please? What I want to do now is get your voice on a topic. So, yes, this is looking like it's working just fine. So we're going to use Slido for this. So you can use your mobile phone to do this. You can scan the QR code. It should take you straight to a site where there's a poll, and we can have panelists do this as well. There should be a very simple question when you get there. The question is, on a scale of 1 to 7, to what degree do you agree with this statement? I am optimistic about Europe's future. Scale of 1 to 7. I can see that I've got 13, 16 votes already. If you're having trouble with the QR code, you can also go to slido.com and use the code SGS. That will get you the question. Panelists, I'm going to read out the results, and then I'm going to ask you each how you would answer that question and why, and suggest that you give your response in less than a minute. So let me wait just about 30 more seconds for votes to come in. We've got 86, which is great to see. See here, we've got a nice normal distribution. We've got every number represented on my screen here. I'll wait about 10 more seconds. I'm trying to see if I get above 100 votes. We've got 96 on my screen. I need just 4 more of you to click the button. 98, that's good enough. The average score here is 4.3, so on a 7-point scale. We've got 4% who gave a 7, 20% who gave a 6, 23% a 5, 26% a 4, 15% a 3, 11% a 2, 2% a 1. So Sabrina Soussan, so the former CEO and chairperson of Suez, you can see she's on the St. Gallen, on the board of the trustees for the St. Gallen Symposium. Thanks for everything you all do to put on such an amazing program. Sabrina, how would you have answered that question and why in a minute or less?
Oh. So I would have voted for a 4. Why? Because it's more than the average, yeah? And pessimism is not a plan. Yeah? And I really believe that we in Europe, we have the potential to do better. I'm a European. I did a lot for Europe. I'm married with a German. I'm French, as you can hear. So I can say that we are at the moment the happy underperformers in Europe. Yeah? And we can do much better, and we have the potential to do much better. And how can the cradle of the Industrial Revolution be the continent of peak pessimism? It's shocking. Yeah, for me, it's shocking. And we all here have something to do about it. And leaders from Europe have proven that they are able to overcome huge crises. So why not now? But we have to recognize first that we are in a crisis. We are not relevant anymore in the world. But we have many things, and we will come to there, to overcome and to be, again, leaders.
Thank you very much. Well framed. So our second panelist then, Nick, the CEO of Oliver Wyman, who I will note is wearing some fancy glasses. And Nick, you can maybe explain those to the audience in your response, but how would you have answered that question and why?
So I did answer with a 6. I probably slightly biased myself by the fact I was filming myself answering it with my Meta glasses. These are cameras. But I'm very optimistic, and ultimately I'm optimistic. But W. Edwards Deming said every system is perfectly designed to get the outputs which it gets. So the outcomes that Europe is getting at the moment are the result of choices made collectively in this continent. And I'm deeply optimistic for the same reasons that Sabrina is, because of the innate strengths of the EU and Europe more widely, technological capability, knowledge, a culture of learning. But the thing that spikes me up from some of the pessimism is ultimately these outcomes come from social decisions. And there are many things in European society, relatively low wealth inequality, very low evidence of oligarchic behaviors, academic freedoms, which are intrinsic, and I think will be intrinsic to the long-term success of economic and political decision. So yeah, we have some real work to do, which we're going to talk about over the next hour, but I do think some of the innate factors are more present in Europe than almost anywhere else.
And Nick did tell me that if he is taking a picture, you'll see a light on his camera. So you know if you see any audience pictures that are being taken. So our third and final panelist, there you go, thank you. But our third and final panelist, Barbara Cooks, so you can see from the description there, on the supervisory board of Henkel and on the board of the Max Schmidheiny, which I hope I got close to saying correctly.
Very good.
Foundation. What did you give that question, 1 to 7 scale, and why?
I'm an optimist. I'm also optimistic for Europe. I gave it a 6. Why am I optimistic? Firstly, I think we are helped by Trump. We are also helped, on Tuesday there was a historic moment in Germany, the first time in history that the Bundestag didn't exactly know what to do at first. But now we have a new government, a lot of investments, etc. So I think that will help Europe a lot. Europe, we are 450 million persons population. We have a very high level of HDI, which is the Human Development Index, compared to other regions. We have a very low CO2 footprint already. It's 6% of global versus GDP of 15. So we are actually doing really well. We have a lot of opportunities. I think of applied IE, so how to use IE, for instance, in manufacturing processes, in innovation, in administrative processes, etc. I think there we have a big advantage. I think that's a great thing. On green tech, which is one of my key topics, it's a huge market. It will go to $30 billion in 2030, and there still Europe is in many areas on a lead, maybe not on EV, we heard that this morning, but many areas we are on the lead. And lastly, I have the joy and the pleasure to be a member of the jury for the best innovation in Germany, which is called the Spark. It's a joint venture of McKinsey and Handelsblatt, and I really enjoy it since 10 years. So we always use one day, we review the 10 very best, carefully selected startups. What I saw was 3D printing for human organs, a European startup. What I saw was a system like Google Earth, but for water. So you can predict and you can assess the whole water situation, ocean, river, lakes, etc., globally. So many interesting things. We also saw a digital twin for manufacturing, which is very helpful for companies. So I'm optimistic. But we have to get it, we have to really now take the curve and make a step, use all what we have, be more optimistic. We need to be more optimistic and really make a big step to bring Europe in a successful and sustainable future.
Well, Barbara, I'm going to stick with you. You mentioned green tech. So what I'm going to do now, we've got the opening frame from our audience members, 664. So we're slightly more optimistic than you are. I'm a 7 to any question about optimism. I'm American. That's kind of what we do. But so I'm going to ask each of them one question. They'll respond, and then we'll get your voices in. I've got a ton of questions if you don't have other ones, but I'm sure there's some really good questions sitting in the audience, and we really do want to hear them. So Barbara, you mentioned green tech. So a big thing that people talk about is, yes, this is nice, but how do we have it all? We need to innovate, we need to push a green agenda, and we have to make money, and it feels like these are choices. Do they have to be? Are those either ors, or are there ways that you can think about, and organizations that you've seen that have really viewed these as both ands?
It's not either or, and the way we have done it successfully was to see it as a business opportunity. And basically, how do you go about? And I remember in Philips a couple of years ago, I was given the responsibility next to the supply chain for sustainability. So at that time, Philips had an internal program, which many companies have, a lot of different activities, but the business people were not really interested. So basically, we used a matrix, which is very simple, and most of you know it. It's market attractiveness on one axis, competitive position, and you also integrate, obviously, the CO2 element. And in Philips, it was easy. It was green lighting. At that moment, LED lighting came up. So basically what I said is, our sustainability program is sell more green lighting, because obviously it's a business, it attracts the business people, and it helps the planet, and also motivates the people. Similarly, in Siemens, where then we were able to increase the revenue from green tech from 19 to 33 billion euros in 3 years. So the key issue here is for a company to, and I have also been a management consultant once in my life, so, and an MBA. So you learn how to use tools. So you really first have to use this kind of a tool and look, where is the opportunity? I mean, for UBS, I worked with my St. Gallen students. We worked on the strategy. What was the green sweet spot? Impact investing. And so you really, there is no business in the world, there is no company in the world that does not have a green sweet spot. So a business, a service, a solution, a software that can, in a sustainable area, that can be used as a business opportunity. So you can do both, and you must do both in order to be successful, because as a company, you also have to look at profits, not just at the planet.
Barbara, the thing I'm really struck by what you described is this mental reframe that you have to do in order to do it. And that really is a key to taking either ors and turning them into both ands. I'm reminded of a case I teach my students about the Japanese cosmetics company Shiseido. A new CEO came in 2014. The company had been struggling, so he changed the planning horizon from 3 years to 100 years. And he said, we really need to put in place the foundation for the next 100 years. And once you do that, your decisions about investments change. Of course, you have to deliver today to earn the right to have tomorrow, but with a 100-year frame, things that look like big bets actually aren't. They're necessary things to move forward. So Nick, I want to pick up this idea of Kurt Lewin and phase changes. So when you go through a phase change, you go from a solid to a liquid to a gas. Things are happening so quickly now, there's all this fog that's coming out that makes it really hard for people to see what to do. As you work with leaders all around the globe on some of the issues we talked about, how do you see through that fog? How in a world that seems to change minute to minute, what do you do to stay calm and actually make good decisions?
Yeah, I feel I'm wearing 3 hats on this panel. So as a management consultant, I get to see into my clients and all of Wyman's clients' thinking. I'm also the CEO of a pretty small business in the grand scheme of things. Oliver Wyman has 8,000 colleagues around the world. I also sit on the executive committee of Marsh McLennan, so we have 100,000 colleagues around the world. So those 3 hats are all slightly different. And one of the things that's very interesting about consulting is that all of our people are unfreezing and refreezing all of the time because they're going on to client projects, and it's a totally new environment. And when they come back home, I think they quite want it to be exactly the way they left it. So they're very resistant to change back in Oliver Wyman, which is my cross to bear and one of my struggles. But for a very long time, I've had this kind of innate distrust of certainty. And I've begun to realize that it's equipped me incredibly well for the world we're now in. You described it as a fog. We've spent quite a lot of our time trying to teach our colleagues of the difference between a complicated problem and a complex problem. Complicated problem being like a clock, where it might be quite hard to understand how everything works, but if you can work it out, you can see that certain inputs are always going to lead to a specific output, whereas a complex problem is fog. It's a cloud. You've no idea, really. The same inputs may lead to different outputs on different days because people are so central and the interactions of people. So I think the answer is companies have to equip themselves for adaptability. We do a CEO survey with the New York Stock Exchange. Last year was fascinating. It's the first time I've seen companies have all three of prioritizing revenue growth, prioritizing cost efficiency, and prioritizing resilience being right up there equal. And in some companies, within a single company, equal with each other. So there is no longer this kind of slightly more phasic environment of I'm in a growth cycle, great, let's all go for growth. Okay, I'm in a recession, let's all hunker down. I think since COVID, actually, during COVID, every single practice area of Oliver Wyman was growing strongly. Our innovation and growth practices, our restructuring practices, our risk practices, everything, which is very, very, unique in my 30 years in the business. Ultimately, at the company level, I think it is about culture. It's about being adaptive. It's about teaching people how to learn if they haven't come out of the education system knowing how to learn. And there are some system-wide things that would be helpful, but I'm sure we're going to come on to those later on.
All right, so maybe we can talk a little bit about systems with Sabrina. You are surrounded by current and ex-consultants. Do you know that? I'm a reform consultant. I started teaching a few years ago. We have another reform consultant at the end and someone who might be reformed sometime in the future. I don't know. We'll see. But so, Sabrina, one of the things we were talking about right before we came on stage is, there's a fact in the Draghi report about the creation of new businesses. I'll let you give the statistic because it's a good one. So that statistic, the system level things that need to be in place to change it, you were the pessimist, most pessimistic on the panel, so let's hear from you. And then again, after this, I want to begin getting some voices from the audience in.
I wanted to provoke with and it's not pessimism again, I am an optimist, but if we don't realize that we have a problem, and if we don't act, then we will have a big, big, big problem. And one fact, there are several facts, 50% gap GDP to the US. It's huge. Yeah. And it's growing. Yeah. And what you said about productivity is also fact. Yeah. And without productivity, we will not grow. And without innovation and new technologies, we will not grow. And Europe needs to close the gap to the US or to China when it comes to innovation and especially new technologies. And the statistics that you wanted to hear is when you look at the past 50 years, companies who started from scratch and reached at least 100 billion euro market cap. No single European company. No single European company. 6 US companies accounting for more than $1 trillion market cap. So this should make us think, okay, something is wrong because we are the country of innovation, technology, we are the country where we have so many people, innovators, researchers, we talked about education before, but we don't manage to build up these new technologies and the new companies. We invest, there is another interesting statistic that I read, we have only 1/3 of the venture capital amount compared to the US, 1/3 in Europe. I think it's 4 out of the top 50 tech companies are Europeans. Yeah. Not the new ones, and probably one of them is SAP. Yeah. So this should be a wake-up call. This should be a wake-up call. And why do we have 1/3 in the past 15 years of the unicorns which became significant company. 1/3 which were born in Europe, relocated somewhere else, outside Europe. It's crazy. This is crazy. So we need to talk about how do we push this innovation. We need money. Yeah? Money was... we need some investments. Yeah? How do we manage these investments? And how do we manage these investments in Europe in a fragmented market? Yeah? And there are a lot of talks about unified capital market, but these lot of talks are coming to nowhere at the moment, and the discussion is happening forever. I don't know, not when I was born, but because I was born too long ago. But many, many years ago, we are talking about this one capital market. So I will stop there.
All right, we've got, I think, a really great frame for some questions from the audience here where we've talked about, I see a hands already, that's great. So what I'm hearing is causes for optimism, causes for realism. We've got some system level issues we need to address. We've got mindsets that we need to address. We need timeframes we need to think about. So rules for those of you raising your hand. When you raise your hand, when a mic comes to you, please stand up, tell us who you are. Ask a question, don't give a monologue statement. Direct that question to one of the members of the panel. The member of the panel will respond to you, and then if another member of the panel wants to jump in, that's great too. So again, questions, not statements, and address it to a person on the panel. The first person who I saw move was just in the second row here, so if we can get the mic here. And I've got hands in a few other places. If you're a little bit shy but have a great question, if your Slido is still open, there's a Q&A tab on it. You can go and type in a question. I'll see them on my phone here, and I'll try to get other voices into the discussion as well. So thank you for putting the QR code back up. Again, just click on the little Q&A tab at the top, and I'll get questions in here. Our first question. I can hear you, but they can't, so hopefully try it again.
I can speak up. Yeah?
There we go.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Scott. Oliver, I'm a CEO of TextMe listed in Zurich. So I voted 5. I first went to 7 because I'm an optimist and I think we have all the pieces and you described them. But then I see these massive structural issues and I see counterforces that seem to be distributing wealth and not creating wealth and productivity. And it just, for me, I haven't seen enough levers moving yet to really be optimistic. I wanted to really ask the panel, and unfortunately, Scott, I don't know who to ask because it's a great panel. Maybe I should ask you to redistribute. The question is, what levers do you see that truly inspire you for this optimism? Where we, like in Germany and also European fiscal system, there's ideas out there, but I don't yet see them.
All right, so let me open this up to the whole group to see who would like to go first. So question, what levers can actually enable optimism to turn into reality? Mm-hmm. Barbara's nodding, so Barbara's going to go first.
We have one great example in Europe. It's Denmark. And Denmark is extremely successful in creating startups and innovation. And when you look at it's very simple for Europe, copy-paste Denmark. Because the first thing is there's a lot of collaboration between universities and businesses. The second thing, it's really made easy to start and to be in a business in terms of administrative procedure, access to capital. They also logistics, they also have special centers, and they have a network also among the startups to kind of exchange. So a lot of, I think, good ideas. The third one is, and in Europe we used to be very good on customer or person or consumer-centric design. It was called Bauhaus in Germany, leading in the world. And in Denmark also that is a key factor, design, kind of centric. Now, money. But Sabrina, we have money, I had the chance to be part of a high-level panel for the European Union some time ago, where we developed a decarbonization plan for Europe, and linked to that was this 100 billion Horizon second step funding. So there is a lot of money there, and actually very few usage of it. Now, for instance, one could do the following: fund with this transnational kind of projects, especially in the green area. So there are a lot of things I think can or needs to be done. Europe is also working, as you probably know, with Omnibus on the bureaucracy, where 60% of the companies, rightly so in Europe, say that's terrible, which it is, yes. So there is action going on, but I really count now on the new German government to bring a little bit of schwung in all of that. And as I said, we have Denmark. We have a great example here in Europe, but it has to be really transnational projects, because when I see a startup, I mean, innovation prize for Germany, it should be innovation prize for Europe. Yeah? Or, you know, the big forum Macron is doing in Paris on digital, again, also that should be done on a European level, in English, for instance. So, you're right, but I think if we all do that, and it's not so difficult actually, then I remain to be an optimist.
So both Sabrina and Nick have made eye contact with me while also listening very carefully to you. Sabrina was slightly earlier than you, Nick, and we won't have every panelist respond to every question, or that will limit the number of questions that we answered, but this was a really good one. So Sabrina first and then Nick. Unless
okay, so very
Nick,
short.
Sabrina says what you were going to say, and then we'll go to the next question. Sabrina, go ahead.
Now, I wanted to give 2 examples where startups made it to the world, to be optimistic. So Spotify, BioNTech, so these are great examples how, and can make it quickly to the world, for different reasons, but for good reasons. So that's one fact. Then the topic of money, yes, we have money, but how do we use it better? And the topic of cross-border. So I dream of a startup based in, I don't know, Spain, where they can hire very easily people from Denmark and get funding from Germany. So this will come, but people need to push for this, because it's easy in a big company. In a startup, it's not easy. And preparing this panel, I thought, okay, I looked at the EU public tenders, worth 2 trillion euro per year. 2 trillion euro. If we would take only 1.5% of this 2 trillion for startup, it would be 30 billion euro. And it's the amount that Europe spent in venture capital. So there are solutions, and there are things to be done. Why aren't they done? It's another topic. But for me, it's a reason for optimism that it could work, and there are concrete examples already.
All right, Nick, let's get your point of view on this, and would love another question from the audience. I see a hand all the way in the back, so that will be our next audience question. I've got great things on Slido that I'll pull in too, but Nick, you go first.
Yeah, I totally agree with both Sabrina and Barbara's points, but I just want to be a little bit brutal for a second. There is plenty of money. We talk about cross-border, just to add Sabrina's quotes, facts earlier on. There's enormous amounts of public investment in Europe, only 5% of which is cross-border. Yeah. So we are choosing to be fragmented, and at some point that's fine. There are identity and social pressures that are causing politicians to go down that line. In terms of the right levers, I do think both the Draghi and Letta reports on the single market have really strong recommendations, really, really solid. But again, we talk about this GDP gap between Europe and the US. 28% of that is because we work less hard.
Yes.
72 is because of productivity points. So we can look to the government and we can look to the sort of governance structures for the 72, but at some point the 28 is totally in our individual control. And that's a choice to be made. So if I had one magic wish, it would be the regulation. Because let's allow people who are willing to work hard and willing to take risk and willing to be innovative and just get out of their way a bit more. Draghi, I think, said that Europe had passed 13,000 laws in the same time that the US had passed between 2,000 and 3,000. And if I had a second magic wand, it would be to finally move decades of debate about capital markets union into what I think Letta described as savings union. Because actually, I think we still have 21% of patents are filed by European countries or in European countries or something. Like, innovation is good. It's the pipeline that Sabrina described. So the savings union, getting more access to funds would be better. But at some level, most business leaders I talk to, they complain about regulation. Most other stuff they view as being in their own hands.
I had a magic wand, I would take those meta glasses and put them on my contacts. Yes, I have some technology envy right now, but our second audience question, please, sir, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Scott Young from your age group, and my question was originally for Sabrina, but Nick, based on that answer, I want you to answer it too. Europeans are often accused of admiring the problem, and I don't think there was anything in the Draghi report that was necessarily new to anyone here. My question for Sabrina and now Nick, putting on, for a unified capital market system, what are the immediate next steps in achieving that? Who is responsible and what is stopping them?
First of all, I think there needs to be the willingness, as you said, and of every country, and every country leader. If the country leaders don't want to do it, it will never happen. Why? I think it's a very complicated, maybe political question, but we should not always, we talked about it before, blame the politicians, because I think we all, and leaders of this world, but also influencers, and you all in the room, we can also push for things, and we can do, even if it's a little things, at the end, if it's added, it will be a lot. And I've seen really influential people, influential business leaders pushing for this capital market union, and it still did not happen.
I mean, ultimately, I think we know exactly who needs to agree, but it's a gap of psychology. I think Scott framed it really, really well earlier. And I think what we need bravery and honesty. In my teams, if we've debated something for a few weeks and we haven't made a decision, we're sort of honest about the fact that, okay, we're not going to make that decision. What's happening, the frustration, I think, in Europe is not that the idea is there and no one's willing to go for it. It's that it rumbles on for so long. And we need an unfreeze moment. And often that unfreeze moment, look at how fast companies, systems, nations moved in COVID. An immediate crisis. Mm-hmm. Whereas the very steady evolution of the competitiveness of Europe is the proverbial boiling of the frog. And so I fear it needs some form of actual crisis to do the unfreeze. But in the meantime, I'd love to just have clarity as to whether we should keep wasting all these calories trying to get something to happen when maybe there's no reality of it happening right now. Okay, let's put it back in the freezer and bring it out and warm it up when there is.
So I've got a different question I'm going to give to Barbara that I see on Slido in just a second, just a reflection on this. I was talking to the panelists before about one of my favorite models that I teach my students, which I teach at a business school, but this model comes from political science. It's from Ron Heifetz and affiliated thought leaders at the Harvard Kennedy School about adaptive leadership. And it essentially says, you cannot get any kind of change without having some degree of discomfort. But at some point, you have too much discomfort as a human being, and you just want to emotionally shut down. Physically, if you're training, you see it. Your body tells you, I have to stop working out. But the emotional discomfort shows up in quieter ways. So you're trying to find ways to get rid of it. So you follow what Heifetz and others call work avoidance, which is sophisticated ways to get the problem away from you. One way you do that is by scapegoating and saying that it's not my problem. I wish I could solve it if it weren't for the regulators, the political leaders, whatever it is. Sometimes that is true, that is the barrier, but in many cases, it is simply a lack of bravery, a lack of willingness to confront the underlying part of the problem. I think something worth thinking about. Barbara, very different question. So this is one that was trending on Slido, elephant in the room. Nobody talks about the elephant in the room, Europe's exorbitant energy costs. How can Europe be competitive if it pays energy that is much more expensive than the US and China? So we're going to solve all problems here. We've got a unified capital market. You're going to solve the energy crisis. Go.
I think it's a key question for the competitiveness of Europe, especially for Germany. And what's really interesting, and obviously having been working for two big energy companies, ABB and then also Siemens, energy has always been close, and Total Energy. So it has always been close to my activities. I think what's really missing today is that, I think here on the European Union level, it needs to make, like I said, an assessment. Where are we? And then really to develop a strategy built on all the technologies we have. And it's interesting, for instance, in Germany, I think since 5 years the infrastructure, the build infrastructure on renewables is so that if there is enough, it's not every day, that's the whole problem, if there is enough wind or sun, they could basically supply, just with the renewables, the whole country. But obviously what is missing is the storage part, so there's some pieces, technologies are there's some pieces missing, but it really needs an overall architecture, it needs an overall plan, and then a consistent implementation. And shortly to come back on the previous question, a lot depends on the politics. I mean, who is running Europe? It's different countries. And obviously, when you look back the last 4 years, we had a very weak German political situation. Macron is also not exactly in a top spot at this moment. Hungary with this kind of Russian links, etc. We have a war. We have a war in Europe. We talk here about innovation, but people are dying every day. So the political situation was so that not much can be done. And that's why I'm so hopeful. Since Tuesday, we have the German government that we have. But I really have a lot of hope here. It's a decisive chancellor, a chancellor that is willing also to do the things that are not pleasing maybe to everybody like we had before. So I really hope that we can solve that, but energy needs a European master plan. And I'm just shortly coming to Switzerland. I mean, we had also all these discussions here in Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland, it's really amazing that just with increasing the water reservoir capability or capacity, and there are a couple of projects ongoing, can you imagine, since 17 years. 17 years, and was unable, and we could increase, I think, by 1/3 our whole energy storage in a very environmentally friendly way. And the head of this company that I met recently told me there's so many Einsprachen, so basically resistance from different NGOs, green, and the next one, and here the birds, and so on. Since 17 years, and we could just solve this problem within our country, it's there. And because my view is that we will in the future not be able to have enough energy supply from the European Union because there is not enough supply there. So what do we do here in Switzerland? And this topic is not yet solved in our country as well. So a key topic, but needs a master plan and a good assessment, and then an implementation. And
Sabrina, you made eye contact with me, and I also noticed that your gold heels are excellent. So let's have your answer, and then I want to get another question from the audience. So I see somebody in how about the second row here, and the second row. So get the mic to the second row while Sabrina offers her thoughts.
It's not real gold.
I figured it wasn't, but if you clicked them 3 times, you'd go somewhere. That's what we all wonder.
Anyway, no, I wanted to, I fully agree with you, Barbara, to give you another example or another food for thought. Regulation also in the energy topic for renewables, for example, it's so complicated in Europe. It's so complicated. And it's also, it takes so long also to build infrastructure. In my previous job, we worked on producing energy from waste and from biomass. You can produce, or from wastewater, biogas, biomethane, and it can be significant. But it takes so long to get the authorization to build, first of all, to prepare the build and to build, and it's loss of opportunity. And as you said, we will have a huge issue in the future in energy in Europe, and we have this source of energy which is not used because we are too slow.
So in the second row here, we're doing a great job on questions. So again, name, question, not statement, and direct it to a panelist. Those are the magic 3.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Johanna Elsner. I'm from Victorinox. So I very much believe in European manufacturing. And I've been carrying this question with me for the last 2 days because The topic of innovation came up yesterday morning already, and then I thought, well, great, here we have been believing that innovation is a problem for our company, but it turns out it's a problem for Europe. But then I thought, well, being an optimist also means being responsible and understanding, okay, we have set parameters, like what we said, regulation, funding, and so on. So my question is to you, Nick, what lies between this space of items that we cannot change right now, like the regulations or the funding, and small, medium enterprises, companies themselves, that we can change to actually bring innovation back to Europe?
Mm-hmm. It's an amazing question, thank you. I don't have the full answer, but one of the things, again, we train our consultants in is to think about the different personas and ways of thinking. And we use a sort of Jungian model actually developed out of Harvard as well, which is, there are thinkers and warriors and lovers and dreamers. And
we're all wondering, Nick, which one of those you are. But no, we'll sorry.
I'm dreamer first, warrior second, lover third, and very little thinker, which is unusual for a management consultant, but another cross for me to bear. But the innovation requires a dream. It requires you to imagine something that doesn't exist now. And as Scott's work has capably proved in the past, your customers may not be able to tell you what it is that they need either. But efficiency needs thinkers and it needs warriors. And you need to be able to stimulate all these types of personalities in your organization. And within Oliver Wyman, we have Lippincott, which is a brand consulting firm. And they have a completely different thinking style from Oliver Wyman and NERA, our economic research teams, who have a really analytical, deductive thinking style. And it absolutely terrifies me that one is going to crush the other, frankly. You have to let that creativity blossom. And so I think that when companies have an over-reliance on predictive modeling, on standard operating procedures, on ticking the box, that's ideal for a complicated environment. But innovation is a complex environment. If there's a short-term focus with cost, with risk aversion, same problem. Companies that have the 100-year mindset, that have an investment in a learning culture, experimentation, the celebration of mistakes made and learned from, that have deep stakeholder engagement. One of the reasons why I love this symposium is the sort of cross-generational discussion. We have within Oliver Wyman essentially a shadow management committee. We call it our Global Leadership Team Council, but it is colleagues who are not at the partner level, and they debate and discuss exactly the same agenda with exactly the same presenters as my Global Leadership Team does. And their representative sits on the Global Leadership Team, and all of their input challenges our input. And I frankly find more innovation coming from those who are less frozen by their 20 or 30 years in the organization. So for me, it's all of those things. It's we have to nurture nurture these different styles, personas at the same time in the same institutions.
Barbara, Sabrina, do you have other comments? I have many comments on this topic, so I can fill panel space, but I want to first see if you have anything that you'd like to add. And no is okay as an answer always as a panelist, but...
maybe what I would not add because you mentioned, but insist on is the culture of mistakes and of failures. And I think countries like the US are much more advanced in this. We accept to fail. Yeah. And you cannot innovate if you don't accept to fail, because then you will never disrupt, never. Yeah. And I think this is a mindset that Europeans and European companies have, and this needs to change.
Yeah, as I said, I have many thoughts on this question that I will not bore you with all of them, but I will double down on what Sabrina said and offer a thought about ghosts. So this idea about failure, I think, is an absolutely critical one. And one of the things you always want to ask is, if there is a hesitation around failure, where does it come from? People will say that there are cultural differences, and of course there can be, but often those cultural differences will trace back to what are the legal ramifications if there's failure or if there's bankruptcy. I remember back when I lived in Singapore, I was on the board of a couple small companies that if they went bankrupt, I would be forbidden to serve on the board of other companies. And I talked to the minister who you saw on stage earlier today. I was part of the committee of the future economy there 10 years ago and said, if you want more innovation, you can't have this, is you want people to go and take risks. So what people often will report as a cultural issue actually traces back to a policy decision. When you have debtor's law, where the debts of the parent goes on to the next generation, when people get put in prison when they owe debt, that's a choice that you make, but it's going to lead people to not take debt and not do things to go and innovate and grow. So you want to make sure that you understand the difference between cultural aspects and what are policy decisions. Ghosts. Every organization is haunted by them. My intellectual lineage traces back to Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma and a number of other books about disruptive change. He pointed out all the technical reasons why it's hard, but there are very human reasons why it's challenging as well. In every organization, there's past trauma that the organization hasn't gotten over. There are invisible, repetitive, destructive patterns that people have followed forever that they're not aware of. And there is a deep, hidden fear that change will invalidate the identity of an organization. You see this very acutely in many automobile organizations these days, where people will say they want to go electric, but they don't. They don't, because that's not who they are and that's not what their identity is. They are actually legitimately scared of that change. Those ghosts of the past, present, future, in homage to Charles Dickens, if you don't name them, if you don't address them, they will destroy your ability to innovate and grow. Every organization is haunted by them. Europe has a lot of them. So great question. Let's keep them coming. We've got about a half hour. We've got a good pace that's going. Let's go as far back as I can see. I see something 3 rows from the back, and I see a nice row of hands here. Let's start in the back here. I'll get one more from Slido, then we'll move forward.
Thank you for the amazing session. I'm a bit pessimistic about Europe, actually.
But you're smiling, so that's you're a smiling pessimist. I like it.
And I have a company in renewable energy which is doing good and making money. So
they turned the light off of you because you didn't say your name. So you say your name so we know who we're speaking to.
I'm Philip. So my question is the efficiency of workers basically the result of us not investing in new technologies, or is it also the result of bureaucracy? Because in the last 20 years, the European Union passed 13,000 new laws and basically legislation, whereas the US Congress made only 3,000. So are we overly bureaucratized, or is it the result of also not investing in technology? Because we don't as you mentioned, we don't have AI startups that are worth over $1 billion like unicorns. We don't have the energy necessary to power them and to power the servers. We don't have data because of the GDPR laws that basically prevent companies from gathering the data and analyzing it and processing it. So is it basically the lack of leadership? Is it the over-bureaucratization? Or is it just there's no political will to invest into?
And which one of the fine panelists would you like to start with that
Yesterday I had a talk with Nick, so maybe with Barbara or Sabrina.
Barbara, your name was mentioned first, so there you go.
Yeah, it's a very important topic. And obviously, yes, we have too much bureaucracy in Europe. And as I said before, based on a survey, 60% of the companies in Europe think bureaucracy is terrible. When alone I look at the whole sustainability reporting that has been built up, I get shocked, because sustainability is not anymore a business topic. It's really one that you need controllers, auditors, AI, making reports and so on, and that's not really sustainability. So yes, we have really to have a drive, maybe not with Elon Musk, maybe we have somebody that does it in a, let's say, more European, maybe a little bit more sophisticated way. And as I said, there is something going on with this omnibus. They want to save, I think, 40 billion euro. So something is going on, probably not big enough, because really we have to move forward. And as I said before, specifically for startup, ease of doing business. And it's so easy. You could create a separate area, European-wide, for startups, to make all this regulatory, to make it really easy to do the administrative side. And nowadays with AI, it should not really be too complex to do. And just to come back, we do have enough innovation in Europe. Where we have a problem is to grow them and make them big. And also here in Switzerland, you know Get Your Guide, probably, many of you, was an ETH startup. They moved 3 years ago to Berlin because bigger space, bigger market, more funding. So we have that topic also here in Switzerland, but we have the topic absolutely in Europe, and I think in 24, the US, 50% of unicorns at that time were in the US, so that's double their GDP, and Europe only 14%, which is only 1 times GDP. So, as I said, using this Danish model, which seems to work, but on a European Union way, also using the Horizon money, because it's there, and not so much used yet. So, I think we could create a lot more with the existing innovation that is everywhere. And I'm always enthusiastic when I see especially university graduates that start a company. And they take the risks, and they know they could fail, but they really, the ones I see in this jury, you know, they really fight for it. They know it, and you know it with the startup. You know, this way is maybe wrong, and then you have to be adaptable. Just go left, okay? So I think you're absolutely right. Bureaucracy needs to be diminished, and with AI, I think we have an easy help to improve that, also in Europe.
So I've got a quick comment on that, and then I saw there were a couple other hands in this area, so I've got a gentleman about halfway up, if we can get him, and then I got a hand a couple rows behind that we'll get next. Barbara, this idea of creating a safe space for people to experiment, I remember one of the things that Singapore, I think, did really well when I was there, is they did exactly that. They created a sandbox for fintech innovators. And that was not just for startup companies, it was also for the large banks that lived in Singapore, where essentially you could go and try things without any risk of bringing the system down, et cetera. Just a very smart regulatory thing to do. And yes, some startups took advantage of it, but DBS Bank, which is the largest bank in Singapore and has been one of the best performing banks in the world over the past decade, used it to really boost and drive its innovation. So there are proven policy approaches that have worked globally. Singapore, obviously very small, but can do exactly some of the things you've talked about. So, okay, we've got the gentleman with the microphone here.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time and offering up your wisdom and experience with us. Like my dear colleague before me, my name is also Philip, but I'm from Athens, Greece, and I study applied mathematical and physical sciences. But my question very much pertains to an issue of innovation, and it sort of is addressed at Sabrina because you mentioned what can maybe increase innovation, but also to Barbara, who said we don't have really an innovation problem, but a problem of scalability. So I'm interested in what you think about the government offering essentially tax incentives and tax breaks to companies who vow to reinvest part of their profits to innovative research, because the government doesn't have the best track record in innovating. It's usually the private sector today with companies like OpenAI, NVIDIA, and Apple, and even small startups. So when it comes to maybe the big companies that can utilize capital to reinvest part of their profits for innovation, or offering these tax breaks to startups and smaller companies who need them to scale, for example. So what do you think about this approach from the government to offer an incentive to companies and smaller startups to invest part of their profits for research? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a great topic, and it's the right question. You know, when I gave the example of public tendering, yeah, and how can we maybe use a small percentage of the government money or the public money to re-inject in startups, yeah? And tax is also one solution, yeah? Or either directly money or through tax or whatever. I mean, there are many instruments to do that. And that's what other countries are doing. Or, you know, startups, when you think about SpaceX, which is a very interesting company, but they started getting an order from the NASA. That's how they started. Yeah? So it's somehow also a kind of public funding. Yeah? So yes, I am in favor, and yes, I think also I agree with Barbara that we have a problem to grow the startup, and it's not only about investment, the level of investment. It's also the cross-border topics, but it's also a topic of mindset, because how do you commercialize innovation? Yeah? And this is not in our DNA, I think, in Europe. This is more DNA of other countries, but this is something that we should push, and we should also learn, maybe the new generation leaders, how to do this better. Yeah? because this is also a big lever to grow startup. Yeah.
Barbara, your name was invoked as well, in a good way.
I think kind of support, the financial support is probably better than taxes, because it's easier for a startup than, because you basically upfront, you have your upfront financing and then you can start to work. I think it's probably the better way. And as I said before, you know, the Horizon money is there, it's 100 billion. And I think that just, we have to find a way how to use this much better for especially transnational startups. And the problem in Europe is also many startups are country specific. How do you want to scale up if you start up in Switzerland? It's a very small market. So also there you need a lot more transnational projects and startups with the funding for a certain moment, and as we heard this morning from China, a kickstart, to enable them a kickstart. And the second part, which is also a big problem still in Europe, is to grow them further. Because for startups, it looks like there is, in many countries, funding available, because people, you know, like to help, and it's not a lot of money at the beginning. Where it becomes difficult is in the second and third stage, because then it's a lot more money, yeah, and a lot more at stake, so you have a bit less funding possibilities. So also there, we need to find a better way, because if not, we will not be able to create the unicorns we could.
Okay, we've got about 20 minutes left. Can I just do a scan of the audience? How many of you have burning questions that have not been answered? Just put your hand up and hold it up. Okay, I've got 2 hands up. I've got some great questions. 3 hands up. Great questions from Slido. I think we can get everybody happy. Okay, good.
Can I just, I think there is one topic that we didn't touch.
Please.
A bit more, but maybe later, but I would like to bring this topic.
Okay, well, let's see if one of these questions gets that topic. I'm going to start. I see red close in. I'm wearing red socks in Switzerland's honor today, so let's get here first.
Hi, thank you very much for your time. My name is Erica. I am from Japan, but I'm studying in the United States right now. So my question is quite general, but I would like to ask Barbara, how can Europe attract people to come, or like people to come back after they go abroad to study? So yeah, I'm in the US right now. People come from all over the world. And you mentioned about like startups and innovations, but you also need people. So what do you think is the first step for Europe to attract people, and how you think you can do that?
Well, many countries are doing that quite successfully. Huh? Look at France with Mistral, look at Germany, etc. But probably it needs to be thought through on the European Union level. And I give you one example from the Netherlands. The Netherlands has a very successful scheme to attract expatriates. Yeah? And they have, basically the scheme goes like that, they have a tax benefit. So if you, as an expat, you come to the Netherlands, you have a very few people know that. But maybe here on the European Union level, needs to be done a little bit more thinking and a solution. And as you probably heard last week or this week, Macron, together with Ursula von der Leyen, has announced, I think it's Science for Europe. So they established a package for scientists to come, the ones that, you know, don't like Trump too much. Scott, maybe it's for you as well, sorry. to come to Europe, and also to have a bit of funding in that package. So I don't see this as a major problem, really, because also many of the especially now, you know, if you study at a US university, being German or Swiss, I think it's probably quite easy that you will probably come back at this moment, yeah? It may change in the future. But I think it's a good point that you made, Erica, that probably it needs to be thought through on the European Union level, and maybe also linked with a certain incentive. I think that could help further, that also you, Erica, you come back or you stay here. Okay. Okay.
Well, yeah, I do think this is a really unique moment. You know, so if I look at the students at our school, the foreign-born students are really scared right now. They're really scared about what is going to happen with immigration policy. Many of the professors who rely on funding from the federal government are really scared right now. There was a long-term assumption that when the federal government agreed that it was going to give a grant for research, that it would honor that grant, and that assumption has been torn up. So the opportunity is to say there are disaffected populations that need a home, that are really smart, really energetic, really enterprising. The US historically has done that, but that's not the mindset in the country right now. So perhaps Europe's opportunity. Nick has lacked a question in a little bit. Someone have a question for Nick? Just looking out for you, man. So I got a hand over here. And then Sabrina, if your topic is not brought up in this question, after this question, we'll get your voice in. And then we had one more hand there, and we're managing time perfectly. Sir.
I've been hiding from these questions. They've been too good.
Nick, I'm Rakesh Sarin from HCL Tech. To the warrior within you, we have talked about culture, we have talked about capital, the transnational. Don't you see language as being a barrier? Across EU, we do not have English as a common language. Even if there were 50,000 regulations, still innovation can happen. Today, we do innovation in Germanic part, in Franco part. We do not innovate for Europe.
It's a great question, Rakesh. I mean, for me, it feels slightly unhumbled to say, yes, everyone else should speak my language. And the English are famously bad at learning languages. I actually don't think it's the primary barrier that I see. I see facility with common language being pretty high. You know, in our own business, we do retain, you know, as we've grown, we've needed to be more local in more geographies, and part of that has been the need to deliver in local language, particularly as you get into certain sectors and deeper into institutions, less likelihood of English being spoken. But I think, honestly, language is a perfect encapsulation of this question of identity. And Scott mentioned earlier on both and thinking and trying to manage polarities and managing paradoxes. Europe needs to find a way to retain locality and identity while also embracing cohesion and scale. And in many ways, what Draghi and Letta say is scale really, really matters, fragmentation is the problem. And yet you can look at highly effective countries like Switzerland and like Singapore. So there are business model choices to be made as well. But if we're going to go for these big scale plays, we need to find a way to embrace both those things. Because like many of the debates of the last decade, and even some of the culture war debates, the whole problem has been this kind of all or nothing mindset in both directions. So I'd be very loath to say that we should give up language, but I also don't really see it as on my top 5 list of barriers. It might be in the top 10, but there are other things that are easier to solve without giving up identity.
I think that the one thing I would add to this one is it's also worth thinking about what used to be hard problems that will be relatively easily solved in the future. And I think language, given the dramatic improvements in artificial intelligence and translation, particularly for languages that are well-spoken, not as well for niche languages, it really does the job astonishingly well. On my last trip to Japan, I speak not a lick of Japan, but through my good friend ChatGPT, I got through everything very seamlessly, including fun thing if you ever want to use AI for, if someone gives you a pile of food, a bento box, and you have no idea what you're eating, you send the picture to AI and you say, what am I about to eat? And it does extremely well on it. That's my travel tip for you. So Sabrina, yeah, a topic that we have not touched on, I bet you didn't think you were going to get that at this panel, but a topic we've not touched on, please, floor is yours.
There was a question about productivity. Is it because of bureaucracy or because of innovation? But there is another topic that we didn't discuss. We are working less in Europe than other countries. Yeah, it's maybe the elephant in the room, I don't know, but it's reality. Yeah. And this is a problem. This is a big problem. Yeah. And we have smart people, we have technology, we have researchers, we have everything, but we we live with good quality standards. Yeah, our life is nice. Yeah, I talked about happy at the beginning, but we work less. And I hope that the new generation, maybe it's not only about working more, but it's also about willing to achieve a lot. You know, the willingness to that was there after the Second World War. Yeah, where okay, this was a big energy. The energy level was at the highest, probably, yeah, to reconstruct, rebuild, and to move together. So that's the topic I wanted to introduce, because I think we didn't talk about this, and we should all think, okay, this is an issue, and we need to tackle this issue.
Nick, Barbara, I wonder if you have thoughts about it. While Nick is nodding. So Nick, you want to offer thoughts? Barbara is thinking. So definitely get Nick in, and Barbara, maybe you after Nick.
So I totally agree, but it's an equation. You know, I've always admired the fact, if you look at any data, that the French work fewer hours than the British do, but because of their higher productivity, have a higher standard of living. So the equation has to be there. But ultimately, I do think that the regulation and you know, some of the incentives of hard work have been whittled away because it's just too hard. Yeah. Yeah. And we come back to Scott's framework of what do you do when it's just too hard, you sort of give up a little bit. And secondly, the safety nets have got too strong. We have a very big political debate in the UK right now about personal independent payment and essentially payment to support people who are either unable to work or disabled in some way. I'm not going to opine on a political matter, but I'm going to look at the fact base, which says that the number of these payments being given has risen exponentially over the last couple of decades. And so the people who are defending that as though it was the same criteria as 20 years ago are arguing against the facts. So it's a credible discussion to have, can we afford that level of safety net? But it's a very different safety net than the one that was imagined by the people who set it up 20 years earlier. Sure. Roland made the point this morning about healthcare in the US being 20% of GDP and in Singapore being in the single digits. I mean, there are real hard choices to be made, which don't necessarily mean cruelty, which would lead to the motivation of more, the reward for more work. But I think there's an even deeper underlying problem, which we haven't touched on, which is population. You know, I think, is it Israel now is the only wealthy defined country in the world which has a birth rate higher than the replacement rate. So there doesn't seem to be the incentive to work harder or to procreate.
So we're going everywhere in this panel. We got 12 minutes left and so many topics still to discuss. I got some great questions that Ali is trending on Slido. So I want to give one of Ali's questions to you, Barbara, which you can double hat. You can also add thoughts on this. Yeah. I want to make sure I get that in, and we'll have time for one last audience question. I saw a hand there, so if we can get the mic to the gentleman who's about 4 rows from the back. Barbara, the question that Ali had here, Ali said, Singapore and Denmark are easy examples. I did Singapore, you did Denmark. They have 6 million people, a single economic hub, everyone knows everyone. How do you scale that to 450 million plus people? So a nice, easy question from Ali. So you can answer that. You can get on this topic of getting people to work harder, maybe procreate more, I don't know. Up to you where you want to go with all of this.
Yeah, let me just shortly on the working hours in Europe. I think it's a very good point, Sabrina, because that's really the truth. But we also should think, this leads also to this high human development index and high level of happiness in Europe, probably also a high level of health. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. But of course, what's the issue now, and you mentioned the procreation, we have an aging population in Europe. So where will we get the future labor force from? So automatically, I think we will need to adjust retirement age, etc., maybe also working hours over time, because at the end, we have to stay competitive in the world. We are still in many areas, despite the more, non-working hours we have, but still, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to remain competitive on that, yeah. And the question on, Denmark, yes, that's absolutely true. But you know, on the other hand, when you look at the European Union, how many things we were able to combine and to find joint programs, and shouldn't be that difficult to create kind of a startup zone in Europe, or maybe 4 or 5, should not be so difficult. And obviously, you would probably do them in English. I think there are other examples where things have really gone well. I mean, also the way, for instance, the European Union has been working together for COVID, or also at the beginning of the Ukraine war, remember? I mean, so I think when there is a crisis, there is always ways and means of putting things together. I'm a big fan of pilot projects, yeah, also in my businesses. So also here, you know, you could just start on a European Union level with one kind of a startup zone pilot somewhere, yeah? Or maybe in 2 countries and let them compete and test it and then use it and so on. So I think there are yes, European Union is not Denmark, that's true, but it's here and we can learn we should always learn from the best. And here I think Denmark and, of course, Singapore are good examples.
Nick, you can add something, but it's got to be short. And Sabrina's looking at me, too, so you can add something that's going to be short, because I did promise this gentleman he'd ask his question. And I have a question for all of you, too. So, Nick.
I'm not going to say it because it was potentially foolish, and it would have taken me more than short to make myself not look stupid.
All right, so we're going to get the question from the audience. You're okay, Sabrina? Okay, question from the audience. Last question from the audience.
Hello. Hi, I'm Jonathan from a German airline, and it's kind of to Barbara and a bit of Nick too. I used to work in Silicon Valley a few years ago, and I'm still in awe about the concentration of capital, talent, and technology, and how that created an ecosystem where the stuff that happens there. And we do have some ecosystems in Europe. The German car industry is a bit similar, or the French aerospace / defense industry, but it always stops at a border. There is no such thing as we talk about 450 million people market all the time, but these ecosystems always stop at a border. It appears like in the end we're all the time thinking about ourselves. Do we stand a chance without pan-European ecosystems? Question 1, and if not, and we should build these, who's going to do it? Who's responsible? Because that can't be policy, that must be business, enterprise, and private sectors, right?
And answer those questions, nice simple questions, in about 3 minutes, so we can have our last 5 minutes together.
Yeah, it's a very important question. I mean, we have seen, for instance, in France, Macron established this kind of digital center in Paris 4 years ago, came out Mistral. So I think it's either or. I think also this kind of startup can come from a country. Yeah, we have seen it. You mentioned BioNTech as well. But of course, we should really use the scale of the 450 million market. And this is really, for me, a key role of the European Union. You know, together to say, let's start a pilot, let's create a zone where a startup can come, ease of business, financing, etc. Also that they can exchange, you know, like in Silicon Valley, one of the key factors is also they can learn from each other and their network together. I think it's something, in my view, that absolutely can be done. I mean, France, for instance, established in Sofia Antipolis 20 years ago, a very big research center. So they developed that, they put it there. It can be done, but this is really for me, and again, I count now on a bit more leadership from Germany in all these decisions to establish the next step on pan-European innovation.
And I think it's happening. You know, we talk about the US here as though it's a monolith, but in Silicon Valley, I'm sure you observed the reaction of the Texans to California and some of the competition for talent there. And there's nothing monolithic about the US. It took a civil war, but they've evolved. You know, Europe has had its own ghosts. I love Scott's analogy of the ghosts. So I think it will happen. I think it will continue to happen. I think it is possible that defense, actually, is the place where the crisis is big enough and the sort of platform burning fast enough to drive that. Vladimir Klitschko made these points earlier on about the amount of innovation that's gone on in a hot war in Ukraine. So there's a lot to be shared. You look at Finland, you look at Poland. I mean, maybe that's somewhere where an ecosystem will evolve. It will require private-public sector interaction. I was going to spend some time, but we don't have time now, but there's a project you should look to in Australia called the Ghost Bat, which is an autonomous vehicle built between Boeing and the Royal Australian Air Force, developed in 3 years, a really interesting example of public-private partnership, how to share risk, how to share intelligence, 55 companies, I think, involved in the supply chain. So ghosts in more than one place in this conversation. But yeah, I think there's hard work to get there. I think you've diagnosed it perfectly, but I do think there's hope.
All right, if I may add one topic,
please.
A few seconds. Why don't we start this pan-European with education in innovation? We have no European MIT-like. Yeah? We know that our universities are not in the top ones. But why don't we start with EU MIT-like university? Maybe you can answer this question, why we don't do it.
Great question. And if you're looking for professors to join, here I am. Okay, very good. So we've covered a huge amount of territory in the time that we've had together. And of course, there are more questions than answers given. This is a complex, not a complicated topic. So a question I'd like to ask all of you, I have opened it on Slido. So you can go back to your phones. It should automatically be in your Slido app if you have it up. If not, you can scan the QR code. And I will ask this to the panelists as well. What one word represents what you think needs to change to sharpen Europe's competitive edge? What one word represents what you think needs to change to sharpen Europe's competitive edge? And I will start, in this case, with Barbara and work this way, and I will read out the final results when it gets to me. So Barbara, what one word do you think needs to change to sharpen Europe's competitive edge?
For me, it's enthusiasm and optimism. And there is a philosopher, Ralph Waldo Emerson, an American philosopher, who said nothing great can ever be achieved without enthusiasm. So for me, it's really, I don't feel this enthusiasm at this moment in Europe. Without that, nothing can be done. So we really need this enthusiasm, and then, of course, we can tackle the other things like bureaucracy. We have all mentioned them today. Enthusiasm.
Nick.
Hunger.
You want to say a little bit more?
I don't think we're hungry enough. And I think that if you just think about a hierarchy of needs, Maslowian hierarchy of needs, for example, when everyone thinks they're very relaxed, you're much more worried about things other than the basic needs. And in COVID, we were all deeply hungry for protection, and everyone moved incredibly quickly. What is the mobilizing force that makes us more hungry? And that could be a dream by great leadership, or it could be panic, running away from something. I'd rather have the former than the latter. But I think hunger is the thing which helps us overcome the barriers.
Sabrina.
I cannot repeat, but I would say courage. Courage, why? Because we need courage to put in place some of the actions we discussed during this panel. And this courage will be more than necessary to achieve what we want to achieve. And without courage, this will never happen. But we are all courageous, and it's up to us to make it happen.
Well, first of all, before I read what's here and give my own thought, I want to thank the fantastic panel that we've had. How about a round of applause for Sabrina, Nick, and Barbara? And also, I'd love for you to just keep clapping, because you have been a great audience. This really has been a conversation, so appreciate all the great questions, and we will clap for you, and you can clap for yourselves too. Really well done. So the things I see here, I see a lot of things. Deregulation, of course, so there are some technical things that need to get done. Regulation is the counterpart to that, vision, execution, et cetera. Optimism, where we started, that's the one that really resonates with me. One of the things that I have pondered for a long time is, why is innovation so hard for large established organizations? Why is it such a challenge? And the reason why this has been such a question to me is, you ask, what is innovation? Something different that creates value. How do you do it? You're curious, you experiment, you collaborate, you try things. These are not difficult behaviors. I have 4 children. The oldest is 19, the youngest is 8. The behaviors that innovators follow come naturally to children. So we all are innate innovators, but we go inside organizations and we forget that. It's constrained and contained, but the potential is there. The innate potential that exists inside large established countries, large established organizations is unbelievable. And the optimistic are the ones who say, yes, the great unfreezing causes all sorts of problems and challenges, and yes, it creates a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reinvent, reimagine, refresh, and really recreate and build something that is incredibly powerful for the generations ahead. So I hope you leave the session with a little dose of optimism. Lunch is next. That goes until 1:45. Thank you all very much. This has been fantastic.